stories, first of all, why should we even do this? If you're helping us record some of these videos, or if you're a mentor and you're going to walk through these videos with some students, why use stories? First of all, stories shape worldview. And so when you believe a story to be true, it begins to shape how you see the whole world. And this is important because whatever your worldview is, it's going to affect your values. And whatever your values are, determine how you make decisions and choices which produce behavior. And so if you want to see someone's life transformed, if you want to see the way they behave change, you have to change their worldview, which changes their values, which will change their choices and their decisions. And how do you shape that worldview? With stories. And there's no better way to do that than a trusted person through a relationship sharing those stories.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing is that stories captivate interest. We're naturally just wired to hear stories. And when we hear stories, we kind of get brought into it, right? And we're more interested in what's happening as opposed to just reading somebody different things, different facts, or even if you're trying to tell somebody something from your life that's impacted you and you just give the main points, that's very different than you actually telling the whole story of what happened and how they came to be where they're at now. So stories, we're naturally wired for them, right? We're more than ever a storytelling culture if you think about it. You look at TikTok, right? You look at Instagram, social media, right? Movies. It's constantly stories being told. And our young people are on all those things, right? They love watching movies. They love social media. And they get a lot of the information through that. So what better than ever, for us to tell stories, the gospel through the stories, right? And tell Jesus' life through stories.
In fact, God, when he decided how he wanted to communicate truth with us, he used stories. Genesis is a story. Joshua, it's a story. The story of King David, stories. You look at the prophets and the story of Israel and the prophets' interaction with them, stories. You look at Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, stories. God communicates truth through stories.
Yeah, and it's crazy that if you read in Mark, it actually says that Jesus didn't teach without telling parables. In Mark chapter 4, verse 34, it says, he did not say anything to them without using a parable. So he saw the importance of storytelling. And he would just tell these stories and pretty much just walk away. It's not like he gave all the facts behind everything and try to give a bunch of background info. He just basically told the story, and people believed because of these stories that he would tell.
And it's interesting, a pluralistic society like America where people believe all roads lead to the same place, and it's like very proud to say your way is better than someone else's way, or your beliefs are better than somebody else's beliefs. People could right away just like cut you off, write you off, ignore you. But if you just start telling them a story, their defense system and their argumentation kind of stops. And you say, hey, there was 4 guys. There was a guy named Matthew. There was a guy named Mark. And a guy named John. Well, John and Matthew were eyewitnesses. Mark wrote down Peter's eyewitness account. And Luke, he was a historian, and he talked to all these eyewitnesses. And here they're telling you not just fictional stories, but here's the stories. Why not evaluate the life of Christ? And so to communicate to students that are very pluralistic, a story is a very non-threatening way to communicate with them truth. And they'll begin to wrestle with, are these stories true?
Absolutely. And if you think about what we're doing here, why are we talking about storytelling? Because we're thinking about the gospel. At the end of the day, we want young people, we want all people to hear the gospel. And an effective way to preach the gospel, to share the gospel, is through telling stories. Jesus' life, right? You can't just share what Jesus did. And you could share what Jesus did, right? And how he died for people on the cross and all that stuff, right? We could share that with young people. But if we tell them the story of Jesus, we tell them the life story of Jesus, who he was, the importance of, why he came into the earth, what he did, all those different things. You put all that together and we present that to a young person. That's a lot more captivating than just sharing some main points of the gospel. So storytelling is really where it's at if we really want to reach these young people.
And what's interesting is reading a story versus verbally telling a story is we had students here at Youth for Christ in our junior high program or middle school program where we were doing a club with them, and we were talking with them, communicating with them. And when we would do the Bible lesson, we noticed that when we would read the story to them, it was almost like cell phones would come out, start texting, or, almost like their eyes, they would kind of like quickly get distracted and stop paying attention when we would read to them. But when we would internalize and not word for word memorize, but be able to clearly and accurately tell the story to them. Like their eyes were glued in. They were listening. They were on the edge of every word. And even more amazing is the next week we would come back and say, who remembers last week's story? And then they would think for a second, someone remember it. And they were even able to tell the story back. And then we say, who remembers the story from 2 weeks ago? And they can remember stories from 3 weeks ago. I can't remember sermons from 3 weeks ago, but they were able to remember the Jesus story from 3 weeks ago. And so we found that it was effective, it worked, and it was more easy for them to remember what we were teaching them.
Yeah, so storytelling is it, guys. This is what we're trying to do here, teach you guys that storytelling is very important. In the next video, we're going to teach you guys how to actually tell a story. So we could tell stories. We tell stories all the time in our conversations, right? But we're going to try to teach you guys how to actually tell a Bible story, and specifically a story about Jesus. So check out the next video. It'll be right under this video in the link below.